My name is JP Jones, and I'm the Don Bennett Moon Dean of the College of Social and Behavioral Sciences, and welcome to Homecoming. And yay! My guest this morning is Burc Maruflu, Dr. Burc Maruflu, who is the founder and CEO of Savaya Coffee. And I met him, we started talking about coffee, and he's just, he's a social scientist through and through. Even though his PhD is in finance, he's a social scientist through and through about coffee. Everything from putting it into the ground and getting it to the cup, and social ecological processes and the international sphere, everything having to do with certification, whether it's organic, bird friendly, how far, the diversity of the vegetation, everything, all of this stuff influences coffee. And then it gets to the cup. And then there are big distinctions between different kinds of coffee that we come across. And his specialty, and in fact the motto of Savaya, taste coffee for the first time. And I've got a question for you about why Savaya can take that moniker. But brilliantly, he's teaching in our food studies undergraduate degree this semester, and is really excited about continuing that. And we're really pleased that you take time away from your family and your business to teach our students about coffee.
It's such a pleasure.
That's fantastic. And so this is the really crazy part. His family has been in coffee for 500 years. And I'm going to get this right because I'm going to read this. But and this, I've been to Turkey a couple times, and you're from Turkey.
I am.
And your family roasted coffee for Sultan Suleiman the First, or Suleiman the Magnificent, and that would have been in the mid-1500s. And you're all the way through to your grandmother making coffee for Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, who's the founder of modern Turkey.
Right.
So what an incredible history of being involved in this wonderful beverage industry now. And so I guess the first question is, can you tell us a little bit about how you can trace your family's history through all these centuries in the coffee business? And then what brought all this to Tucson, Arizona, of all places?
It's not a continuous history, nor my family was in the business of coffee. However, it's a very interesting one. And my knowledge base was basically direct hearing from my grandmother herself. She passed away in 2006 when she was 92 years old. But up until then, I spent a lot of time with her, seeing her roasting coffee, serving coffee, since I'm aware of myself. But the story goes like this. And I have to be very sincere about this, because when I look at the coffee books and the coffee history, there are all kinds of stories, true or not. But my source comes from a real person, from a real family background. And it's not the story that you necessarily find in the books. I did start some research, putting together some of the historical facts, but the historical facts do not come from the story of coffee itself, rather from other things, because coffee was not as popular as it is today, and the history documentation was not for the coffee itself. So I have to trace it with other happenings that the history brought to us and documented in different ways. But the history goes like this. So my many times grandfather, who used to work in the palace for the Sultan, and had a pretty good status in the palace. He was in charge of the governors of the Ottoman states. So he had a very good position. He was a pasha. What happened one day, again, this is a family lore coming to me from my grandmother, and we can trace this part of the history about the happenings. So he had a disagreement with the Sultan, As a result, he was exiled to the farthest state of the Ottoman states, which happened to be Yemen. He was an important man, so he had the family and lots of people working for him. So with a big caravan, he went to Yemen. And the governor of Yemen at that time, he was also reporting to him because he was a very respected and a very educated person. He hosted him really nicely. And during his stay, it lasted more than a decade, they discovered nutrient or food that was called coffee. The history books say that the coffee was first discovered in Ethiopia by a goat herder. It's a kind of a nice romantic story, and it could be. But the world's first cultivated coffee farming really happened in Yemen. Um, so at that time, when they were consuming coffee as an energy giving nutrient, they did not consume it as the coffee that we're consuming today. So it was more like a soup that they had the coffee cherries lend its flavor to the liquid, and then they were consuming like a soup. Anyway, that was the consumption method. So a decade later, maybe more than that, somewhere between a decade and 2 decades, he was forgiven by the Sultan. I think what he was standing for proved itself in time, and he was called back to the capital, which was Istanbul at that time. So he packed up. Probably it was a long process, and on his caravan, lots of family members and probably servants and other entourage. They came back to Istanbul. One important part of that story is when they were coming back all the way from Yemen to Istanbul, of course, they were stopping at places and having relaxing, having food, water, or whatever their needs were at that time. But they were visiting the inns on the way, and probably because he was a statesman, he was also checking, how the states were doing. Ultimately, he worked for the Sultan anyway. One of his stops was, I don't exactly know whether it was Damascus or Aleppo, one of the two Syrian cities on his route. Um, and all of the stops, some of the families, they wanted to give their kids to this caravan so that they could go to Istanbul with an important person and have a better life. So they just wanted to, I guess, prepare a better future for their kids. So these two Syrian boys joined this caravan, probably among with others. And then at the end, they ended up in Istanbul. And what he had with him was a lot of coffee cherries in his, packaging. So he brought lots of coffee cherries from Yemen to Istanbul because I guess they were a little bit addicted to that. And they probably liked the pure natural energy source. Am I making this too long?
Well, it's an interesting. This is an interesting story, but we also want to bring everyone up to date about how you got to.
Okay, let me speed it up.
Okay.
He comes to Istanbul. He has lots of coffee cherries with him. Now I combine my coffee knowledge to this history, knowing how coffee cherries behave after they're picked from the tree. What happens to them? They turn into something like this. This is a dried coffee cherry. So when they have this, they cannot consume it the way they were consuming it before, right after picking from the tree. And probably in Istanbul, in Topkapi Palace, I'm sure you have visited it. And if you visit the Topkapi Palace, you automatically you're stunned with the size of the kitchen. It's an enormous building, and Topkapi Palace is not one enormous building. It's like a cluster of lots of buildings. So this building happens to be the biggest one, and they had some purposes for that. They were preparing their statesmen, everybody who had some kind of an education through the palace, through the kitchen, learning patience, hard work, care, all those kind of things as they're preparing for their positions later. But anyway, in the kitchen of the palace, that was the first time when a brewed coffee was invented, discovered in the world. So the first birthplace of the brewed coffee, roasted brewed coffee, was the kitchen of the Topkapi Palace. And then soon after, Sultan's wife really loved the coffee, and they turned it into a ritual. And because my grandfather was the person who brought this coffee, he didn't do it himself, but he had people who were working for him, 40 people actually, 40 people responsible about coffee making in the palace. 5 of them were present when Sultan was serving coffee to his guests. But what's about those 2 Syrian boys is that when coffee went outside of the palace, first it was in the Pasha's houses when they were serving their gifts, their guests. The first coffee house in the world started in like 1554 in Istanbul, and it was started by those 2 Syrian boys that came with the entourage. So that was the birth of the coffee house, first time in the world, and the birthplace of the coffee as a brewed beverage was the kitchen of the palace. Now going back to grandmother, that's what I learned everything I learned about coffee from my grandmother growing up. Her story, I'll try to make this very short, is a few centuries later. We're talking about mid-1500s for the first part of coffee when it first came to Istanbul and turned into a beverage that we all enjoy today. But my grandmother's history, she was at a young age, she was an elementary school teacher. And when Ataturk did all the revolutions, one of the revolutions he did was changing the alphabet to the old Ottoman alphabet, which was a mixture of Farsi and Arabic, to the Latin alphabet and a new Turkish language. So my grandmother was educated or getting her education to become one of the first teachers to teach the new alphabet and the new letters. She was an elementary school teacher, and she was getting her education, furthering her education in that. But she knew how to brew coffee, and she was very famous about that. So when Atatürk was when he was going to visit Izmir, of course the governor of Izmir was preparing huge welcoming ceremonies for him. And because they knew Atatürk really loved coffee, and because my grandmother was known for her coffee brewing skills, they asked my grandmother to prepare and serve coffee to Atatürk in this ceremony, within the ceremony. And she did, and she was very excited, and she prepared and she served him coffee. And they had a talk, and she was also interesting for him, and because of the language, because he was paying a lot of importance to the revolutions, and he was making sure that they would be sustainable. So they had this talk and little conversation, and afterwards he also invited her to Ankara to attend to some other events about the language. But several years later, when Atatürk was visiting Izmir again, and they were organizing these ceremonies again, this time he himself asked for that young lady who prepared him coffee, and he asked if she could prepare him coffee again. And she did. She was roasting her coffee, and she was brewing in a very special way. And she again served him this coffee. He got a few sips, and he looked at people and he said, that's the best coffee he has ever had. That made my grandmother very famous about this. And after she passed away, she was called like that, the young girl who served Atatürk's favorite coffee. And that's what it says on her, that's the epitaph on her tombstone. So that's how I learned coffee, just growing up, smelling, learning. I didn't ask very scientific questions for her, nor I'm not sure if he was very scientific about that, but she applied lots of her love and art to coffee, and that was the beginning of coffee experience for me.
Mm-hmm. So you make the big difference between commercial coffees, the average coffee, and then specialty coffees. So maybe you could tell us. We're gonna get a little. We're gonna get a little. It's almost like being a sommelier. You'll learn a little bit more about coffee and how to taste it, rather than just drink it for the energy that it gives you in the morning. So can you tell us a little bit about the distinction between specialty coffees and other coffees?
Absolutely. As it sounds, specialty coffee is special, and the way to really understand and put a taste to its reality is to consume the coffee black by itself. Um, Rightfully so, coffee is getting a lot of attention lately. It's becoming more and more popular and becoming more and more crafty. And there are waves of coffee history itself in its consumption. And we're right now at the they call third wave of coffee consumption. And then you see coffee shops paying a lot of attention, measuring everything in details and preparing your coffee. And sometimes they do some kind of a latte art and present that to you. Now, my approach to specialty coffee is the coffee itself, not the coffee shop experience, but the coffee as a fruit, coffee as a bean, green bean, and a roasted coffee. But the only way to understand its quality is to drink it black. Now, I'm not against all other kinds of coffee making because it's kind of like an ingredient, and a good chef can turn that ingredient into an amazing other taste. But I'm interested in that ingredient and its in quality. And by itself, it's a whole big world that there are lots of things to be discovered. So I base my course about, I start my syllabus with the question, actually it's right here. It says, ever wondered where your coffee comes from and how it ends up in your cup? So that's basically, it's all about the coffee supply chain and then it comes. But the way I constructed this class was, there are two ways of getting coffee into your cups. One is the commercial coffee, big farming and lots of actions, activities, um, organized processes to get the coffee from the farms that are producing all kinds of coffees to your cup and in all kinds of roasting methods and getting it to your cup that you can mix with all other things and enjoy it. Whereas in the specialty coffee, every phase is very much cared for and it's very transparent and the players who touches coffee in every phase. So what I did in my class is we're talking about a $200 plus billion industry at the retail level. So when the coffee is served, sold in the grocery stores, we're talking about more than $200 billion industry. And if you look at it's less than 10% of it. So there's a big difference, even though there aren't too many faces in between. So what I am doing myself and sharing my knowledge about is understanding the coffee supply chain better and understanding the realities of the people better, so that there is more care in those phases, and the people who put those care in those phases are rewarded a little bit more fairly. So I constructed this class about talking the commercial coffee supply chain, talking about the specialty coffee supply chain, and their comparisons are really giving us lots of information. Whole bouquet of subjects.
So when you, uh, as a specialty coffee seller, you go around the world visiting small farmers
Right.
and selecting your coffees.
Big farmers too, but kind of going back to your previous question, let me define the specialty coffee. What makes specialty coffee different than commercial coffee? First of all, specialty coffee has to score 80 points and above on a scale of 100 points. These are standards set by Specialty Coffee Association and Coffee Quality Institute. Coffee Quality Institute is the kind of the governing body of how those standards are met and licensed. So it's pretty technical when it comes to objectively score coffee. There is your personal liking, but you have to look at the attributes to be objective about that. Kind of think about figure skating. Uh, the athlete goes, they perform, they select the music, but the judges who are really judging the figure skating, they look at several things, including the theme, the music, the choreography, and everything. But they look at the edges, the clarity of the edges, how they control the flow over ice, the turns, the spins, the speed. So they're also scoring the technical aspects of it. They might personally like some music, some choreography, or the people, or they come from a country that they have visited and liked before. There's a little bit of a personal influence on that, but mostly it's very objective. Coffee is like that too. I have my favorite coffees, I have my favorite countries. However, I have to be very objective when I'm scoring these coffees. And to actually, Specialty Coffee Association and Coffee Quality Institute, they did a phenomenal job about making this sensory process very objective. These are the forms that we're using to score the coffee. Anyway, it's a whole new subject, and we're learning this in the class. So it's really a very informative class and entertaining for that matter. But it's an objective score of 80 points and above. And then we talk about the defects, because specialty coffee really has to be defect free. So there are some primary defects in coffee, and that comes from every coffee. Basically, if it's a full black, full sour, dried cherry pod, damaged, fungus damaged, there are foreign matters that can happen in coffee, branches, stones, and other things, corn sometimes. And then there are insect damages, and then there's a count for the insect damages. So specialty coffee cannot have any of the primary defects. If there is one, that disqualifies that from specialty coffee. And then that's in the green form, so we do green grading. And then after the coffee is roasted, if you find one Quaker, which is an unroasted bean, even though it's roasted together with other coffees, if there's one Quaker that we can identify by its color, basically it's an unripe coffee bean, it's immature, that cannot be roasted. One of that disqualifies coffee from being specialty. Another one is there are some secondary defects, there's a count for that, but specialty coffee has to be selective hand picking. So ripe coffee cherries have to be picked one by one, because there are other methods. You can strip the coffee branch and get the cherries. There are mechanical harvesting and all kinds of, but specialty coffee has to be picked one by one for their best ripeness and maturity. So that's specialty coffee. I hope I didn't make it sound too boring.
No. And maybe you could talk about the consumption side. And I know you've got a tasting palette here, and I just found that really fascinating. And so maybe you could show that and talk a little bit about how you're a Q taster, which is a certification from an international
Coffee Quality Institute.
And so it's very much like wines. You have to achieve a certain level. I understand your son at 18 was the youngest certified Q taster in the world. I don't know if that's still the case, but
he's not the youngest anymore. But when he got his, he was the youngest in the world.
He was the youngest.
Yeah.
And he got his before you got yours.
That's true.
Yeah. So so it runs in the family. Is all I'm saying there. But maybe you could show your tasting palette, and later on when we put it over there, people can have a look and see, can judge this coffee that you've brought against this color palette.
Sure. Talking about Memi, he, sh- he stunned us. He shocked us a lot. It was 18. He had to be 18 to get that certification, and I didn't pass the test my first time. There are certain tests that you have to pass. Certain tests that they allow you to retake. Um, Scoring, you cannot retake really right away. You have to, if you fail this, you have to take it another time and really get prepared for it. Thankfully, I passed those. But Mimi, when he passed this, he didn't have to retake. I cannot understand that. Like he was like so prepared for it. Um, all that time before, when we were together, and this is Mimi, he was my son. And then after that, this is Mimi, I'm his dad. So basically, we're trained about lots of things. Green coffee grading is one of them. So we have to be very familiar with the defects on the green coffee. But then to pass the test, we need to be trained about lots of sensory skills, uh, visuals too, but lots of sensory skills. Because to be able to score this form, we have to smell, we have to relate those smells to something. There are categories of different smells. We have to get familiar. There are blind tests, all kinds of tests, 19 tests that you have to pass. And then there's the the taste and comparison and cups, and it's pretty rigorous. You have to be prepared for it. And it takes like 6 days, 3 days very dedicated to the test. And consuming all that coffee to pass those tests, your metabolism changes a little bit. It's just lots of coffee. This is what I really like to do and I'm fascinated about is I kind of want to reach out and find the best minds in coffee and connect with them and tap into their experience and their knowledge. I'm really not talented myself, but I learn a lot from people, and I try to do that tirelessly. This is a flavor wheel. This is the second version of it. The first version had like two flavor wheels. I kind of liked it a lot too. Developed by the person who founded Coffee Quality Institute, Ted Lingle. Um, I had a privilege to meet him several times. I even went to China with him together, cupped those coffees, and visited the farms. It's just like he's so knowledgeable. Just being next to him uh, makes you somebody. That's enough qualification, I guess. This is the second version of it. They made it a little bit more, easy on the eye, I guess. But we use this also to relate to the taste. But eventually, what we're looking for in the coffee taste is the flavor. And the definition of the flavor is basically the simultaneous experience of the taste and the aroma. Together they're the flavor, but we look at the flavor, its intensity. We look at the aftertaste. That's a time component, how long that good taste or bad taste lasts. If a good taste is lasting in your mouth, that's a good thing. You can score it better. If a bad taste is lasting, that's very bad. Um, so you note that too. We look at acidity to be able to score it accurately. We are trained with tasting acids. We taste all kinds of acids: lactic acid, citrus acid, acetic acid, phosphoric acid. All kinds of acids. And then the body, the viscosity, we look for that, smoothness. And then there are some other things we look for in the coffee, basically in the area of defects, if we can taste or smell those defects. But anyway, this can be another long course. I just recently, as recent as last week, got a new certification that I can teach about uh, the coffee cupping on behalf of Coffee Quality Institute, and actually I can uh, uh, give their certification on behalf of that. So it's a very new thing. I'm very happy about that.
Good. And so maybe there's some questions that we can have from the audience about this product. Um, yes, please. Thank you. Great.
I heard you talking about coffee cherry. Is that before it is actually roasted and then it becomes the coffee bean, or is that designation in shape?
Right. It's a wonderful question. I'm so glad that you asked it because we need this background.
Can you repeat the question a little bit? And
Of course. So basically, the question is about the coffee cherry and um, in what state it is when you pick from the tree and what happens to it until it becomes roasted, right? Like what in what transformation it goes through. Um, Coffee cherries are just like apples. There are lots of varieties of it. In the same way, like a Red Delicious is different than a Granny Smith, it's different than a Fuji apple. We all call them apple, but they're different. Coffees are just like that. There are lots of varieties. They do taste differently too. It's not that the brown, beverage that everything tastes the same. They're very different. Um, we mind those varieties because they influence the taste of the coffee. However, there are lots of other things, both genetically and environmentally, that influences the coffee's flavor profile and quality. So once a cherry, it could be, the reason I gave the apple variety example is it's not that only it's the red cherry, which is very typical that we know. There can be different colors of mature coffee beans too. It could be yellow coffees, it could be orange coffees, pink, all kinds of shades around. But let's talk about the red coffee cherries, just like the cherries that we know. They look kind of like that. However, their fruit meat content is very, very small. That's why we don't find it in the grocery stores and we don't consume it like a fruit. I have a lot in the farms and I kind of like its taste. I kind of get the cherry, chew it, and get its beautiful flavor, but it lasts very, very short. The proportion of its seed to the cherry is in the favor of the seed. So it has a very big seed, very small coffee fruit, which happens to be tasty, but it dries very quickly too. So once, and that's actually is also a problem for the coffee farmer because it lasts very short after it's picked from the tree until it could be consumed or sold in its cherry form. It dries up really quickly and you have to sell it to the next buyer, which is the milling process. Milling process is basically picking the cherry from the tree, coffee cherry, and getting it ready for export. And that is an area that is very important for the coffee quality, and it's a special area for my personal interest because that processing phase is a phase that you can add lots of quality components to the coffee without changing its nature. It's all like how you dry the coffee until it's exported. I have actually examples for that. There are several traditional and experimental and innovative processing methods. When you pick a red cherry from the tree, soon after it starts drying. So this is kind of a dried, kind of a little bit dehydrated coffee cherry. If I dry this under sun like this, and then take the seed out of it after a certain time, maybe several weeks, this is called the natural process. It's one of our coffees. If it's dried like this, there's kind of an internal fermentation that takes place, and it lends its fruit flavor to the coffee. So please taste that. Another process is when you peel the skin off and start drying the coffee under its fruit, you get something like this. So it dries up really quickly, and this is called the honey process. It's nothing to do with the bees' honey, but the Costa Ricans started it calling it honey because it is a sticky thing, when it's fresher. So you dry the bean on a parchment and a cherry and a fruit, and it gives a certain taste to it. I have that coffee also. You can taste that. Now, very traditionally in some countries, everything is pulped. You take the skin off, you clean the fruit off the cherry, and there is a layer called parchment. In the class, we also teach about the coffee's anatomy, and we go over these things. So this is the parchment. This is how all washed coffees are dried. They're called washed coffee because they wash to separate all these layers from the parchment. They dry it in parchment because you need that moisture level in the coffee in most of the growing regions, except Indonesia. Because it's so humid, if you were to dry it like this, it would take forever. So it's a process called wet hold. They go all the way to the coffee seed itself, which is this, and they dry it like that in Indonesian islands. You're welcome to take a look at those later. But basically, coffee seed development is very important because you know the aroma precursors. I hope I won't be too technical here, but the aroma precursors and the volatile compounds, they start forming. They're made developed in the coffee tissues as they ripen and mature. And then comes the processing. Those two things really influence the coffee quality. Um, I think I should stop because I mean it can be really long.
We do have another question over here.
Hi, Professor. I have two questions. The last cherry, the small one, what was that process you said? And what are your favorite notes in coffee?
Oh, my favorite notes. So kind of related to your question, taste coffee for the first time. It's coming from a person that tastes coffee all day long, every day. How do you taste coffee for the first time when you're doing that? It's kind of like a marketing slogan too, because we hear our customers say that a lot. They say, we have never tasted coffee like this. Thank you. So it's a real saying in Savaya that a lot of people said, either we have not tasted coffee before or this is not coffee, one or the other. It was different. But for us, it's our internal mantra too. So we are very interested in the unique profiles, discovery of them, but at the same time keeping the traditionals in their best quality because they are repeatable. And if you are interested in a really chocolatey coffee, if you're gonna brew it in a certain way, you like to get those taste notes. You should be able to get that. There are fruity coffees. There are all kinds of different taste profiles on that. If you're asking my very favorite, I like maybe like a marzipan taste if I'm gonna do an espresso shot on it. I like fruity coffees a lot if I'm gonna do maybe a siphon brew and a French press. Turkish brew, I like a little bit more nutty taste in that. So depending on my mood, it's kind of like fruit. You don't want to eat bananas every day, even though you love bananas, but or other things, or tomatoes, but you don't want to every day eat that. Your mood changes, and if you're an informed consumer, then according to your mood, you can pick your coffee, you can pick your brewing method. And actually, we offer that at Savaya. It's an interaction between us and the customers, and there's really not a charge for that. We've been doing that for decades now. That's why taste coffee for the first time. We're so amazed with the innovations in processing methods. A coffee comes the other day, it was just like a pulpy orange juice. Okay, I loved it. It was very nice. But then there are some unique tastes. It tastes like a passion fruit. It tastes like a chocolate. And there are some versions of chocolates, nuts. I taste sometimes. Okay, this is like a mulberry, but some other people ask, "What's a mulberry?" There you can have your own experience and interaction with the coffee itself. So I like coffee from Yemen. Very unique taste profiles. Very difficult coffee to get. So if I can get, I'm very lucky. I kind of like it, and it's not like I don't get it all the time, so I look for it. I want to get it as much as I can. I like some of the Brazilian coffees, even though Brazil is #1 coffee producer in the world, and because of that, they have to do lots of average and commercial coffees. So not all the best coffees come from Brazil, but because they have to, for specialty, they have to advance their processing. There are some incredible innovations coming from there too. I like Colombian coffees. I like Guatemalan coffees. This is a very unique coffee from Dominican Republic. It's not your typical coffee source, but I believe it's amazing, and it's not a very high altitude, even though I like coffees coming from high altitudes. And I like unique coffees sometimes because I want to know what influences that quality. Where does that taste come from? I kind of want to put, get the taste and kind of imagine the story behind it. And I try to learn the story behind it. That's why I go to places.
So I have a follow-up to that question, which is, given your expert palate, do you ever put sugar or milk or anything like that in your coffees, or are they always unadulterated? And what do you think about people who drink coffee with oat milk or soy milk and extra sugar and cinnamon and pumpkin spice and so on?
I tell people when I'm asked that question, what's the best coffee for you? And I tell my customers, my friends, everybody, the best coffee is the one that you like. So there's no argument there. The best coffee is the one that you like. As a professional, when I'm grading coffee, when I'm scoring coffee, I have to consume it in its purest form. So it has to be objective. When I'm paying attention to coffee, I consume it in black without having anything in it. But there are some coffees, for example, I get this, let's say, a Vosh chef from Ethiopia. I find some interesting lemon notes in it, for example. I sometimes put a little sugar to that coffee just to highlight that lemon and turn it into a coffee plus lemonade type of taste, and it's pretty interesting. I like desserts in general, so I have a sweet tooth, but again, some coffees really would go well with that. When I'm not paying attention to coffee, when I'm driving or reading a book, or coffee is my friend, I like to get a properly made latte or a cappuccino. Because it's kind of like chocolate consumption. Probably people who are in the cocoa business, they grade the cocoa by itself, and they probably prefer more darker, bitter chocolates. But it's up to you. You can like milk chocolates, you can like white chocolates. I don't, but you can. So coffee is like that too. The best taste is the one that you like. You can certainly, it's like an ingredient. You can take that and make something from it. And so I personally like to taste black coffee because you shouldn't consume like a lot of coffee per day. It is very potent. It comes with caffeine, so you should limit it to 3-4 cups, maybe 2 cups, depending on your tolerance level. But make those 2 cups or 3 cups really good ones. And if I were to choose, I have to limit my consumption to that. So if I'm going to go with 2 black coffees, maybe I'll do a latte. It's a really personal preference. But everything in moderation is really good.
Thank you.
My kids say that in their elementary school, some of their classmates from Mexico drink coffee. And other kids' families say, no, kids shouldn't drink coffee. What are the norms of coffee drinking for kids around the world that you're familiar with? Do kids drink coffee early on around the world, different cultures?
I have never had that question before, but thank you for asking. Let's talk about this together because I started smelling coffee first, and at those ages, I liked maybe juices more, and coffee was not my first preference, and it was hot also. When my grandmother was making it was hot, so I didn't really care too much for hot drinks as well. I think that might have some influence on the coffee consumption at earlier ages too. I don't know if there is an appropriate age or drinking age for coffee. I don't know about that. My son started very early because we were tasting these coffees and making comments. Wow, oh, amazing, this coffee tastes. Probably he developed interest in that. My upbringing, my grandmother's coffee consumption did not have those comments, so I did not maybe put an interest at very early ages. I don't know if it's harmful, but anything beyond moderation is probably harmful. So my own example, my son started making espressos, all kinds of drinks, and at early age. He was not only the first Q grader in the world, but he was also probably the first coffee expo attendee. Whenever he could legally go into a show floor, he would, and sometimes they would really ask about his birth date or ID to let him go. So he developed interest. I think it depends on where you're growing. But one other factor that comes into my mind when I'm thinking about the answer of this question is when you think about kids in coffee growing countries, and think about the farmers for that matter, they really don't taste coffee. The incredible quality producing farms or countries, up until recently, I did not find too many farmers knowing how their coffees taste like. This is a problem that I later on looked into and tried to find some solutions, because care is also important there. Understanding of what they're producing is important there. But coffee consumption happens in the first world. And our segue to coffee these days are through Starbucks, Dutch Bros, Dunkin' Donuts, all these places where coffee is a little ingredient in the dessert drink that you're getting. So that's the transition, I believe, to adulthood, about consuming coffee a little bit more pure later on. It's an interesting question. I think we should think more about this.
It reminds me, I went to the coffee growing mountains in Oaxaca, a little village on the other side of the mountain from the city. And we spent the night there, and we woke up in the morning and we had Nescafe instant coffee.
Yep.
And it was just shocking to me that they weren't consuming the cash crop that they were growing.
It's so common.
Yeah.
The only coffee you would find that the farmers would consume actually would be instant coffee.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Well,
I've seen that a lot.
Burc, I want to thank you so much for your interest in coming here, but also in educating our students through the coffee class. And I understand you want to do it again next year. And I couldn't be happier, and I really appreciate everything.
Yeah, the class is very real. We have lots of fun. I'm having a great time in the classroom, learning also from the students, because I'm really not a teacher, I'm a learner all the time. I just share my experiences with other people. I'm loving it. Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
And thank you for joining us and for bringing the Dominican Republic coffee today.
Thank you.